Hi, my name's Rob, I'm a smartphone filmmaker, and this week we have crossed the 100 subscribers mark, so thank you everyone who has subscribed so far. If you haven't or you're new to the channel, basically I talk everything smartphone filmmaking, from tips, tutorials, Filmic Pro tutorials, and I make short films as well. So without further ado, let's get into this video, and today we're talking about the top 10 tips for filming in sunlight. So these tips will be in no particular order because I think they're all very important to filmmaking in sunlight. This one is to use shade if it suits your story to create a nice soft light. As you can see, the dappled light from the trees there working its way onto the bench, the pigeons, and the actor. It just creates a really lovely, beautiful light, and it creates a nice softness to the face as well when you're filming, and it really draws your eyes to your actor or actress. Now this scene we were going to film out in the broad daylight, but when I saw this wooden pier and that we could get under it, it just felt like it was the only place he'd be able to go to have this private conversation about wanting to leave his work with his boyfriend. So it seemed like a really great place to have that. And the soft light that it created, because it covers him completely, is absolutely stunning. I think it makes the shot, it really does. And it's such an interesting place to have the shot. And the sand either side of the pier kind of creates a bit of a bounce to his face. You get some light there. So I think using any kind of shade you can use to soften the light, if it works for the story, is such an excellent thing to be using for filmmaking in sunlight. The following tip I want to give you is you can actually use the sunlight against the lens itself. So you might not want it in the actor's face, but you can totally have it facing the lens of your camera to create these really lovely sunbeam flares. Now, normally you talk about anamorphic lenses when you think about flares, but you can use the natural light that you're given to create something really beautiful. As you can see in this shot, we got the over a house shot, and the sun's just starting to creep down behind it, and it's creating these really lovely beams that are going across the bottom left of the screen here. So if you're doing a film, maybe it's set on a farm or something like this could really make it just look a little bit Hollywood, a little bit more professional, and give you that real nice cinematic feel and storytelling vibe as well, which is what we want. Now, of course, you get this in all sorts of things, so you can, wherever the sun is, you can make something out of this and give your film a little bit of extra zest. And in my short film that I made called Surviving at All Costs, that's another one where I use the sun flare where he's in the kitchen. It completely covers the kitchen, but it works really well. It gives this kind of mysterious feel. So you can't quite see into the kitchen, but the sunbeams coming through are really alarming and quite disturbing as well, because you're not quite sure what's happening. It's a bit creepy. So yeah, use the sunbeam lights when you can to get some lens flare, can create a really beautiful shot. So the next tip is to avoid having your actors facing the sunlight. Now it's obvious why. It's because you're getting a huge, strong, hard light on the face. This is overexposed. This side isn't exposed at all, it's underexposed. You're losing all the detail. Not to mention the actor is going to be squinting, like I am. Should have brought my sunglasses actually for today. And it's just going to be very hard for the actor to concentrate and focus. And the person who's the DOP, the cameraman or woman, isn't going to be able to get the detail that they want out of the person's face or their eyes as well. Not to mention if the actor is trying to face their eye line or some actor that's behind there as well for them, it's just going to be incredibly difficult to concentrate, and you're not going to be able to get that kind of focus and relaxed atmosphere that you need to get a good performance out of your actor or actress. Not to mention that if you're in sunlight so much, you can end up getting a little bit burnt, so make sure that you're not facing them in the sunlight if at all possible. Now I know what you're thinking, this image looks perfect, but if you look closely to the left, you'll see the shutter speed is 1/2304, which is a little bit higher than the 1/48 shutter speed that we want to match with the 24 frames per second that we're going for. Now, the reason we want to do that is that it gives you nice filmic frame rate. So this is the kind of frame rate that you'd see in a film unless it was slow motion, that kind of thing. And we're using ND filters. The ones I'm using are Moondog Labs ND filters. I'm using a ND2 and an ND3 stop, stacking them together to make an ND5. Now, as we see here, if you want to get to 48 frame shutter speed without an ND filter, this is what you get: horrifically overexposed. You can't make anything out. It's completely unusable, horrific footage. Just doesn't make any sense to anything you're ever going to film. So what we want to do is add these ND filters over the top, and you'll see the massive difference it makes. You can keep your 48 shutter speed, 24 frames per second that you want, and you can minimize the ISO, which is at 23 there, and you can raise it, which overexposes the cloud slightly, or you can get it to a lower number or its lowest if it works, to make sure that you're getting perfect exposure and getting the ISO to the right level you want, to make sure that the picture is nice and clear. Now, I'm sure you've heard it all before. ND filters are sunglasses for your lens, so they cut out a certain amount of light, which then allows you to control your shutter speed, and it allows the colours to kind of bloom in the whole image. It just looks fantastic, and these Moondog Labs ND filters are just brilliant for doing that. So that is why you want to have ND filters. Gives you massive control over your image in really bright sunny weather like this, and I promise you they'll be one of the most important purchases you ever make. So the next tip I want to give you guys is to look up at the skies and at the clouds. Now, why do I want you to look up at the clouds? That's because if you have a lot of clouds in the sky when it's a sunny day, you're actually going to have a lot of breaks in the sunlight. So if you're filming a scene which is on anyone and there's a lot of clouds, you can have moments where you're dipping in the light, out the light, in the light, out the light, and whether you've got ND filters or not on your camera, it's going to be a huge issue. In one of my scenes for my films called Broken Zen, which you can check out on the playlist, there's a scene where I'm meditating and a train actually goes past, and that was on purpose. We timed that so it would be the case. But there were clouds that were constantly moving across, and they were like little bit clouds. They weren't like huge chunks where we knew where they'd be stopping and starting. So if we'd waited maybe another half an hour, if we were able to, we probably could have got a much clearer skyline and been able to have sunlight throughout the whole scene. But unfortunately we weren't able to do that, so towards the end of that shot it goes a bit darker, and that's just because the sun covers up the cloud. So make sure when you're filming in sunny conditions that you check out the clouds and make sure you're not going to have a break in your light whilst filming. Okay, so another issue you might face when it's sun shining, you have it right in your face as an actor, but you do want to have the actor in the sun. Now it's going to be too bright for one thing, but what you can do is get a 5-in-1 reflector, such as this. Now you can use for diffusion as well bed sheets. That's a cheap way of doing it. You use a white bed sheet, you can double it up to get more diffusion on the light, to soften the light. So if you get one of these 5-in-1 reflectors, if I just pop out, you got negative fill, so you can create a bit more darkness on one side of someone's face if you want to. You got the reflector on this side. Not to mention, if you unzip it, you can use a gold side to get a bit more, I suppose, a glossy Hollywood feel, and you can use the white side as a white bounce. Now the reason I want to show you this in particular today is because it has a diffusion in the middle, which you can use on particularly sunny days like this. So if you've got a shot that you have to have in the sun, if you put it over you like this, it creates a really nice soft light. And you can put it right there in the sun. Now if I take my glasses off, and it's blinding and it's baking, but if I put this over, it creates a beautiful light. Now this isn't perfect, I'm just doing this myself, but if you've got another crew member who can help you soften the light, a 5-in-1 diffuser and reflector is such a great piece of kit. Now like I say, you can use bed sheets instead to create a softened light, to diffuse the light more. But I mean, you can get these so cheap, they're about £15 online, and I got mine for £5 on Gumtree, a second-hand website. So you don't need to have the most expensive equipment to make it look good. So look around, go on second-hand sites, Facebook groups, local Facebook groups, things like that, where people are selling second-hand equipment. Because something like this, I don't think it's really worth paying £15 for. It's a really useful piece of kit, but if you can get a second-hand one, then why not? So that is something I would definitely look at. Now remember, if you, oh god, that's blinding, in really hot conditions, another tip is to look after your crew, your cast, yourself. When it's really, really hot, I had to put on my sunglasses again before I melt. When it's really, really hot, obviously people get very, very thirsty, get dehydrated, people get headaches, people get frustrated and sometimes a bit angry, that kind of thing. I've been on a set where I brought my own bottle of water, but the crew, the production team, didn't bring anything else. So when it was really hot, once I'd finished my bottle of water, that was it. Another 2 or 3 hours in heat where I wasn't able to get any drink or anything, and it was just pretty much hell. And it's really hard to concentrate and relax and do your job when you're dehydrated. So make sure that your crew, yourself and your actors are all well hydrated. You've got lots of water on set with you, or you've got access close by to some. It just makes the whole day a lot more pleasant for everyone, and no one wants to be stuck out in the heat dying of thirst. That's better. Something else that I would definitely think about is check the weather regularly before you go on set. So the week before, 2 weeks before, what have you, just make sure that you're up to date with what's going to be happening on the day. Because the last thing you want to do is be ill prepared for a day that's potentially more rain than you wanted, or maybe it's just too hot to film. So make sure, because you know, in Britain our weather changes basically by the hour, so we have to make sure that we're prepared. And I check the weather whenever I film anything. I check the weather daily up until that schedule point, so I know if we get to the shoot day and there's going to be too much sun than what I wanted, whether it's not going to be enough sun, I time it and I get to locations so that we're there for that weather I want. That way you're not wasting time, and you can use the time that you're not kind of waiting around to be productive at home and then get on the set when the weather's right. So check the weather regularly to make sure that when you get there you can deal with the level of sun or lack of sun that you're going to get. Okay, something else I want to talk about is where the sunshine reflects off of the phone that you're filming on. Now this is a really tricky thing to deal with, because when it's so sunny it's really hard to see what's on your screen. And you can see from this different reflections that we're getting from different angles, and it's almost impossible to see what's on your screen. So one thing you can do, other than obviously just put your hand over it and try to do that, which it just doesn't really work that well, rather than chancing that you've got the focus correct or that you've got the picture and image that you want, you can put a t-shirt over this, so you can just hang it over and put your head under it. That's a free way of doing it. Or you can now buy, I think they're called black matte hoods. So essentially it's something that fits around your phone, so you can film in bright sunlight and you can still see whilst filming and in between shots what exactly you've captured. So I think something to cover the phone so you can actually see with bright sunlight beaming off it, so that you don't just get reflections, is a really good thing to invest in. And like I say, you can just use a t-shirt as well if you want to bring a spare towel or something that you can just chuck over it and over your head so you can see what you're filming exactly, because in sunlight it can be really, really tricky to see exactly what you've got. The next tip is to protect your highlights. So this one I can't really take credit for. This is from Richard Lackey, whose YouTube channel is brilliant. It's really worth checking out. He talks a lot about color grading. He's a colorist for smartphone filmmaking, and his top tip, or one of them, is to protect your highlights. So if you look at the clouds here, you'll see that I've managed to capture all the detail of the clouds that's possible. The building to the left, that's just a pure white painted building. It's facing directly the sun at the moment, so it's kind of impossible to get rid of that. But if you bring out the ISO, you can see everything blows out and into overexposed territory, which is not what we want, obviously. So you want to keep that ISO low, same as you would do if you're indoors. You want to keep it as low as possible so you don't get any noise. But outside, we want to protect the highlights with the ISO, keeping it down and protecting all the exposures, underexposure and overexposure. Now, one of the reasons we also do this is so that when we get the footage back and we're editing, we don't have to worry about trying to bring, you know, the shadows down, the highlights down, anything like that too much. Everything we do in post will be just slight adjustments, which is really important, because when it's overexposed, it's just horrendous to work with, and you cannot save the highlights when they're blown out like that. It's impossible. Can you smell what the Rob is cooking? Well guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful and interesting. If you have, hit the like button, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. Like I say, I make short films, Filmic Pro tutorials, accessory videos as well, and storytelling tips as well for filmmaking. Now I know a lot of these tips today would have been also applicable to regular DSLR cameras and such, but I think it's really important that we treat our phone cameras like any other camera. Yes, there's some differences, but if we can treat them as if we've got something high-end with us, then we'll produce more high-end productions, films, shots, frames, and all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that we can make these look as professional as possible, because I've seen films where you would never know it was shot on a phone, and that's something I think we should all be aiming for. So guys, if you've enjoyed it, please do hit the subscribe and like button. Take care. Bye bye.